I'm Jonah Aragon, Program Director at Privacy Guides.
And I'm Nate Bartram, the video content producer for Privacy Guides and editor of The New Oil.
And you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker, as always. And today we have episode 474 for March 30th, 2026. And I've been trying to do this for some time now, and I'm so glad we finally got this together. And I wanted to bring Nate and Jonah on the show from Privacy Guides. I know both these guys. We've gone back for many years. We've all been in the privacy advocate space for, probably a decade or more at this point. Hard to believe it's been that long. But anyway, they do some fantastic work. Nate is from The New Oil, a website that if you've not been to, you definitely need to go to. And now they are both actually with Privacy Guides, which is a phenomenal website. And what you may not know is that a lot of us privacy advocates, including these two, and some other folks from Privacy Guides, and every once in a while Henry from Techlore, and some of my other folks that I know in this space, and probably people you don't know that are privacy people, we have a little signal chat that we all keep in touch with each other and share news stories and bounce ideas off each other. It's a fantastic space, and I love having that little private chat where we can put our heads together on things like this. And so you may not realize that a lot of us actually keep in touch on a regular basis. And so I actually had several people in my annual listener survey say that I need to bring some of those guys on the show. And I have had them on the show. It's just been a while. So I'm really glad we finally got this together. We actually had a really long and fun chat, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So there's not much more to say. Let's get to our interview with Jonah and Nate. All right, Jonah is the Privacy Guides program director and editor. He also runs TripleBit, a nonprofit ISP behind many privacy-related tools. Welcome to the show, Jonah.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here. Nate is a digital content producer at Privacy Guides and founder of The New Oil. Prior to working at Privacy Guides, Nate co-hosted the weekly privacy news podcast Surveillance Report with Henry of Techlore. Welcome back, Nate.
It's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've been wanting to do this for a while, and actually this was kind of a user request in my annual listener survey. I had at least 2 or 3 people say, hey, you need to do more crossover stuff, and maybe you should get those guys from Privacy Guides on that show. I was like, yeah, I haven't done that in too long. So I don't know how many people out there know this, but we chat on a pretty regular basis, us and several others in our privacy advocacy space. But it's great to have you on the show. So thanks for coming on. I want to just kind of have a conversation about stuff, as privacy advocates, get a little meta. So let's start with the usual. Tell me what got you guys into be privacy advocates. How did you come to start The New Oil or the Privacy Guides? Nate, start with you. Give me a little background.
Oh, gosh. So the quick version is The New Oil started because I was trying to spread privacy to my family and friends. And my mom made a comment about, she kind of used to be my target audience. She made a comment about how she wanted to learn more, but she didn't want to be bugging me all the time, which doesn't really bother me. It's not bugging me. But so I kind of made my own website just as like, here's the basics of everything I know. And then at the time I was a lot more involved on Reddit and r/privacy and stuff like that. And so I would see people asking very, very entry level questions. And sometimes even like, I don't even know where to start. I'm new to this privacy stuff. So I started sharing my website as like, well, I made this for my friends and family, but like, if it helps you, cool. And, kind of just grew from there. And I started looking into other ways I could get involved, with the joining Surveillance Report and Privacy Guides. And just kind of
was there something that triggered you getting into privacy? Like for me, I always go back to Snowden. I've always been kind of a private person, but it was the Snowden thing that made me think, okay, this is an everybody problem and it's a real deal. Was there something like that for you?
So for me, it was Michael Basil's podcast. I don't know how many of your
Extreme
listeners
Privacy,
remember that one, but yeah. And it was actually at the time he used to have a co-host, and his co-host was on a finance podcast that I listened to. And so I heard him there first. And I remember thinking like, oh, this guy sounds like very sane, very knowledgeable. And so I followed him over back to his podcast. And I actually remember the moment they were talking about how they use different services to like compartmentalize and not put all their eggs in one basket. Yeah. And they said something about the the defender needs to get it right every single time. The attacker only needs to get lucky once.
Right.
And that was when it hit me. At the time, I was a Google person, Gmail, Google Search, Google Calendar, Google Drive. And I was like, oh, like, obviously I have nothing to hide, but it's like, that would not be good. My whole life would be out there. And so I started to kind of look into some of the services they recommended. And I'm like, oh, this is actually a lot easier than it sounds. And so that kind of brought it around to me, like, evangelizing to my friends and family. So.
Gotcha. All right, Jonah, what's your privacy origin story?
Yeah, I guess I sort of got into it kind of organically from other tech stuff. I've always been super into technology, and I've been working in the technology space since around 2013, 2014 or so. And I was really coming at this from like a server administration, self-hosting perspective. So at that point in time, I was getting into more taking control of all of my stuff from Google, which I was also a big Google user of at the time, switching to like running my own website, hosting my own email, that sort of thing. And during that journey, I guess it became clear to me like how much better in a lot of cases these self-hosted services were, at least for my own use case. I really liked them a lot more than what these tech companies were putting out at the time. And then around that time as well, of course, the Snowden stuff was just happening before that. And then Facebook had the whole Cambridge Analytica thing. And it was very clear that all of these big social media companies were really not taking our data and privacy seriously. And so, yeah, all of that just kind of led into this space. I think I had been publishing non-privacy related content for quite a while and working with some other projects. Like before this, I was working with OpenNIC, which is like an alternative DNS project, because I was interested in like the networking side of things and kind of decentralizing that from the major centralized players like ICANN, who kind of control all the domain names. That's a whole separate thing. But then I just went from there to publishing more stuff about privacy, because I guess similarly to Nate, I would encounter a lot of people who were just learning about this or being concerned about this themselves and asking questions about this. And I was like, well, I'm kind of starting out on this privacy journey at the time, but I have enough technical experience that I have pretty good answers to all of these questions that are being asked already. And so I can kind of use that tech experience to help people out and make sure that they're going in the right direction and following, hopefully, a good path.
Yeah. All right. So we've all been at this probably for roughly the same amount of time. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's about the time that Snowden did his stuff. Even if that wasn't directly involved, it really brought a lot of things to the forefront, I think, for a lot of us that care about these things. And so, all right, so you've been doing this for a while. So tell me, like, what's the privacy myth you keep fighting over and over again? And then how has your strategy evolved to addressing that for people who hold that myth?
I mean, I think for me, it's still like the most universal one for sure is still, I think, not so much I have nothing to hide. I don't hear that one quite as much these days, but just, I think what people are saying, or what I've gathered, or what I believe people are saying when they say things like, I have nothing to hide, or they already have all this data about me anyways, is I think people think it's going to be hard. I think people confuse privacy and anonymity. And so when I talk about privacy, they think like, oh, I have to throw my phone away. I have to go live in a cabin in the woods. I can never get on the internet again. I can never watch Netflix again. And it's like, no, you can lead a very normal life. You just, it's a spectrum. How much privacy? Obviously, you could go live in a cabin in the woods and have a lot more privacy than even I do. But there's an in-between space. And I think it's just trying to get people to realize that, and to realize that it's not as hard as it sounds. Encrypted email to the average person sounds super scary, but it's like, yeah, Proton and Tudo work exactly the same way as Gmail and Yahoo. So I think that's still overall the biggest one that I run into.
Jonah?
I definitely run into a lot of people who don't understand like the importance of privacy and like taking control of your data in the first place. They don't understand like why they would want to do this, because a lot of the services, especially in the big tech space, functionality wise, they work very well for a lot of people. And I don't think that the negative effects, at least for a very long time, were super profound, even though, in my opinion, it was kind of obvious to me the direction that all of these products were heading in. I can see why that wouldn't be super clear to just the average tech user. But now I think we're starting to see more and more the negative effects, whether that's through constant data breaches, which now contain like more sensitive information than ever, because companies are constantly collecting more and more sensitive data. And then also just problems like dynamic pricing where these companies are using like your data to figure out how much you're willing to pay for a service, right? Or for a product. Pricing. So that's the sort of thing where like, oh, now this is having a real world effect on people. And I think people are becoming more and more concerned about that, which is a good thing. But that was definitely what I ran into the most for quite a while.
Well, I definitely think it's evolved. Like, I think when I first got involved with this, there's definitely the people of like, I have nothing to hide or I'm super boring. And then I think it went, I think ignorance and apathy were part of it too. Like they didn't understand the full extent of what was going on. I think at this point, most of us understand a lot more. I don't think that we understand the full extent of it because I think a lot of it's still so obfuscated and hidden. It's not very transparent, but a lot of it has come to light through data breaches and other things too. I think that people have finally gotten the notion of, yeah, this is important, but I think that, and you guys know that I say this all the time, I think a lot of people still don't get that it's a collective problem, not just a personal problem. And so it's not just about protecting your data and you being boring and maybe even making yourself boring because now that you feel you're being watched all the time, you kind of don't want to be the tallest blade of grass. But your information overlaps my information. So even if you don't care about yours, then you got to care about all those people around you as well. And I think, at least I hope that people are finally starting to understand that we're all in this together. And that to me has been one of the biggest evolutions that I personally have had. And I've been trying to impress upon that in my audience as well. So I think it definitely has evolved just in the time that we've been doing this because, there's been more data breaches and more things have just come to light. And I think people are understanding. And surveillance pricing, honestly, is a really good one because that's finally hitting people where it hurts. Like this is like, wait, I'm going to pay more for something than someone else? That's not fair. And all of a sudden now, hey, now all the data they collected on you, maybe that really matters.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a collective responsibility that we all share, like you're saying. And individual action can only go so far. And that is kind of what we've been trying to focus on more lately. Just the idea that exactly like you said, all of that information that you have on other people matters and you have to protect that as well. It can't just be your own.
Yeah. So when you're talking to people, family and friends that aren't technical, do you try to explain the technical stuff to them or you just try to keep it more, I don't know, maybe emotional or empathic when you're talking about privacy?
On my end, I'm not sure if I would go either approach. I think I personally very strongly believe that almost all of these privacy respecting services are also better experiences in a lot of ways than what people are used to. So Signal is, I think, the classic example where if people are, I know a lot of Android users who aren't using iMessage or anything else in the US, SMS is still very common. And I guess this would be harder in a place like Europe where some people are using something like WhatsApp because the feature parity is kind of similar. But at least here for me, getting people to switch to Signal really works because I can be like, hey, all of these texting features in iMessage, all of these group chats, it's all just going to work seamlessly here, and that can switch people over. Same with web browsers. I can either get them to switch to Brave, and they're like, wow, I've never experienced the internet like this before. This is crazy. There's no ads. Or at the very least, I can get them to install something like uBlock Origin on their existing browser, and that still makes a huge difference. So a lot of tools like that, I think, I really just try and sell them on the benefits of those tools that aren't even privacy related. And I steer them towards tools that also happen to be privacy respecting.
Certainly with the advent of enshittification, there's a lot of the privacy tools that don't have those problems because they're not trying to monetize you or your data. And I think that's making them stand out a lot more too.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at all of Google services, for example, and they're just tacking on Gemini AI into every single corner
and
that
Microsoft
they can.
Copilot. Oh my
people.
God.
Yes, exactly. So that's the kind of thing that I think people actually want to avoid. And that's the main reason they're seeking alternatives. Not even because they care about privacy yet or they want to switch to these solutions, but because they're trying to get away from all of these crazy technologies that the privacy invasive companies are putting out.
Yep. So you've already said that it's a continuum. Privacy is definitely a continuum. It's not binary. So we also like to say that, when people ask us questions and they look for definitive answers, well, it depends on your threat model. And, so how do you communicate that without just kind of sounding wishy-washy or non-committal?
I think in my experience, it's what I'm not doing right now, which is just projecting confidence. It's really just because I think I'm thinking of when my friends and family come to me. And so at that point, I've already established trust with them, right? They trust me as the privacy guy, the tech guy who knows how to solve these things. And in a lot of those cases, I'm fortunate enough to know those people and know like kind of what their threat model is and what their level of tech savvy is. But also just to me, it's more about the delivery of, you know, saying if somebody comes out to me and it's like, oh, I want to, I don't know, let's use the recent, like, get off Discord, right? Like, I want to get off Discord. What are the options? And I'm like, well, honestly, in my personal opinion, there's not a lot of good options right now. So it depends. What are you looking for? Is it one-to-one chats with you and some friends? Signal's going to be perfect. Is it running a community? Well, here's a few different options and the pros and the cons. So, and that too, in those situations, I try to work with people directly to see, like, what are your concerns? What are you trying to defend against? Okay, here's what I would recommend. Here's why it's going to address those concerns. Here's things that you may not like that you should be aware of. But that's usually what works best for me.
The whole threat modeling thing is a bit of a double-edged sword because we really try and focus on it because we want to make sure that people feel affirmed about the choices that they're making and like going in a privacy-focused direction. And that can take a lot of different forms, and some people can be more committed than others. But I think that this phrase can get overused a bit because people like a snappy, threat model thing
well,
to
it sounds
look
scary
at.
too.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, especially in our more privacy-focused communities, they have like a certain idea of what a threat model means or like what is the right threat model to have. And I think that has been the biggest challenge with all of this is like re-emphasizing that it's going to be a different path for different people. And as long as they're going in the right direction, a lot of people only want to tackle like one thing at a time, or they're only concerned about like something that they're currently using now. They don't have to go full installing every single tool that we list on privacy guides right off the bat. Like, that's not the goal, right? We want people to find something to replace like an existing tool they already use, not like completely overhaul their entire lives, right?
Yeah. Do you guys have an audience in mind? Like, I got to go back to a story about Michael Bazzell real quick. So his audience is definitely, I mean, it's right there in the title of his book, Extreme Privacy, right? So a lot of the stuff he recommends, I would not recommend to my audience. And yet I'm very interested to hear it because I'd still like to know like what it means to go that extra mile and then have those things in my back pocket. If somebody I'm talking to says, yeah, it's not enough for me, or I got a special circumstance. But I was talking to Jason Edison, who's the guy who does his OSINT classes. And I remember asking him, well, okay, is it Michael Bazzell or Michael Bazzell? He's like, I don't know. He's like, and I said, what do you mean you don't know? You work with the guy for how many years? Yeah, I know. And I've asked him. He said, well, pick whatever you want. And it's like, it's because it's probably not the guy's real name, which, by the way, Nate, your hats off, dude. You've somehow managed to go this long without a real name either. So, mad props for that. I blew that one. But anyway, sorry, that was a little bit of a diversion. But back to this. What is your avatar like as you're doing the podcast or as you're writing your articles? Who you're writing for?
Well, I mean, in my case, it depends because some, like at the time we're recording, I just put out a blog post this weekend where I kind of attack the whole, because with all the age verification stuff going on, I've been seeing a lot of people saying, well, if parents would just parent, and I kind of make the defense that parents, I think it's unrealistic to say that. And I mean, this is like a 15-minute blog. It's like 3,000 words, so you can go read it. It's much longer than I usually do, for the record. But and for the record, I don't know where people keep getting this idea when I push back on it. I'm not saying I'm pro age verification. I'm actually saying we need to crack down on the tech companies. But anyways, that one was written specifically to the privacy community and the people making that argument, where I'm like, here's why I think your argument is flawed. But then I've got others, like the one that's going to be coming out this weekend is about browsers, and it's like a very simple, like, best private browsers in 2026, and it's that's a general audience aimed at everybody. So not every video, not every blog post needs to be aimed at the same person. In the case of the new oil, I try to keep it. It's always been my goal for it to be like a beginner's guide. Like, if you are absolutely brand new to privacy and you know absolutely nothing, you just woke up today and for whatever reason you were like, I need to start taking this seriously, you can come there and you can learn what is encryption, what are some basic tools to get you started. But it's always been my goal that like people would move on to more advanced resources and other resources and get other perspectives as well. So, yeah.
Speaking from the privacy guide's perspective, I think that our idea of a target audience has evolved over time. We have always been mainly focused on, I think, people who are already like on this privacy journey. They've already learned about either the advantages of privacy or the disadvantages of big tech or whatever from other creators, maybe on YouTube or TikTok or elsewhere, and then they want to learn more. And so it's kind of more of an established group, I suppose, and we're trying to write guides for like people who are like, okay, now I do care about privacy. What should I actually do about it? That's kind of been the main focus of our guides and website. Recently, I think we've been at least trying to branch out into more beginner-focused content and more content that can maybe get people more interested in it. It's why we started this YouTube channel last year, and we've been posting videos to hopefully reach an entirely new audience that we haven't reached before, because I know video's huge these days, and we can try and get people invested in privacy via that means. So from that perspective, it's expanding a bit, but we always try in all of our content to write things in a way that they can be understood by pretty much any average adult computer user, which is to say, like, we assume people have some level of education or whatever, but we don't assume a certain level of like technical background or experience, right? We want pretty much anyone to be able to access this content if it is the content that they're already looking for. We hope to be there for them.
Well, the great thing about Privacy Guys, among many things, it's a fantastic site. Is not only do you have the recommendations, you got the forums as well. So if you have questions, there's a great audience there, not just yourselves, and you are active participants. I see you guys post all the time, but there's a lot of other great people on the forums that answer those questions in very thoughtful ways. So it's another great resource. So even if you find an article, you still have questions, well, you can ask questions on the forums that are right there. So
yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we have so many great community members there. I would say probably most of the posts or answers to those questions are not from any of us who work on the site. And kind of going back to one of your questions about privacy myths earlier, I think that the forum has really helped a lot of ways in that respect, because like typically, like if you have a question and you're starting out on this privacy journey, it's almost certainly been asked by somebody else who was asking this before you on the forum, and you can find these answers. And that's been a super helpful resource, and it's showed us a lot of things that we might not have considered if we were just writing the guides ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I think that's a good segue into this next question, and that is that you guys really go above and beyond, I think, in how you evaluate the products that you recommend. It's a very rigorous process, and I want to dig into that a little bit. What are your key criteria for recommending a product, and how did you come up with them? And I got to say, by the way, this is one thing that drives me nuts about EFF, is they studiously don't ever recommend anything. And it's like they put out these great articles. They just had this, what was it? There's a really long article about how to pick a password manager, and then refused to give you one to even 3. Like here's 10 that meet this one criteria. Okay. But just tell me, give me a top 3. Anyway, you guys don't do that. You actually do have recommendations, which I love. And you've got a process around those, and you made a point of having a process around that in criteria. So explain that to the audience. And then kind of along the way, how do you build trust with the audience and avoid conflicts of interest? Because I think that's another thing that certainly with VPNs and other things we've seen elsewhere, that could be a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, both of those things totally tie together. I think all of our recommendations have really been community driven from the start. Our entire site was like open source on GitHub, and all suggestions go through our forums, and they're pretty thoroughly discussed. In some cases, for some tools, we have discussion threads that are hundreds of posts long, because people are really invested in making sure that we consider every single aspect of these tools and all of their downsides and upsides and how they compare to other tools on the market.
There are whole discussion threads on your forum about the criteria that you use.
Yes. I mean, truly everything that goes on the site has been thoroughly discussed previously on GitHub until we moved to the forum. And now we try to pretty much put everything through those site development topics on the forum, because it is kind of more of a group community consensus effort. And I think our role as team members at Privacy Guys is to kind of gauge what the overall consensus is and synthesize that, write it up into a way that reads well on our website and makes sense to people. But largely it's not really any of our team members coming up with original ideas for what to add to the site most of the time. It's an entire community process. As far as the criteria that we use for these tools, this is a case where it does depend on the tool, and we're definitely a lot more strict about criteria in some categories versus others. All of our service provider recommendations, so if we're talking like VPNs or email providers or search engines or whatever, like these are services that in a lot of cases you're trusting with unencrypted data. And so privacy and security both really matter a ton. And so we have, like in the case of VPNs, for example, a very long list of criteria that I wrote years ago when we were redoing the whole VPN page to make sure that all of our stuff was above board and that it all made sense to people. In comparison, something like a local notebook app is not going to have like as much criteria or stuff around it, like preventing things from being listed, because the risk is just a lot lower. We obviously, would not want to recommend malware, but if things are working as intended locally, there's not a huge privacy risk. And then in that case, we can have more recommendations, because the idea is to promote like local tools and open source tools as much as possible. So if you look at like RSS readers, news aggregators, we have probably at least a dozen different recommendations, whereas for something like VPN or email, we just have just a few that we've like thoroughly vetted, right?
Yeah. Has there been one particularly contentious criteria for some of these products? And I'm guessing VPNs is probably one of them, because there's all sorts of people that like to bicker over different types of what makes a good VPN. Over the years, what has been some of the most contentious things or just things that have evolved, either because the space has evolved or because your thinking has evolved on criteria?
Our criteria definitely evolves as we have discussions on the forum and as new information comes to light. We definitely use the criteria as a list of things to look through when we're evaluating a service, but we all on our team and in the community, we all have our own like set of expertise that we use to evaluate these services on our own, kind of independently of their criteria. And sometimes like a new product will come out, and if we're not comfortable recommending them for some reason, we want to make sure that we can write a criteria to add to this list in a way that it makes sense why this product is being excluded, whereas the other ones are not. So it does grow over time as we think of new things. It's not an exhaustive list right now. And we've had issues in the past where different service providers, particularly in the email space, and I can name Skiff as a major example, especially because they're not around anymore, but they put in a lot of effort to kind of meet all of these criteria to get listed. And eventually they were listed, and that was shortly before they were then acquired by Notion. And that whole discussion, especially because they did get listed for a brief period of time when they were still around, I think really changed both how we handle these requests and also how the community sees new requests in these criteria, because it left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. And yeah, it's put a different light on a lot of different, especially VC funded services that get brought up in our community for sure.
Or companies that get bought out by some private equity fund. I mean, there's so many different ways for these things to take a turn, and and they do evolve over time. So Nate, I'm curious. So with the new oil, you're kind of more in the space where I'm, where like it's you, like it's your spot. You get to make recommendations or not. Have you struggled at all with that? I know I have over the years. Like I used to recommend LastPass all the time, and then they had the horrible breach. Then we learned that they were really not doing what they needed to be doing behind the scenes, and I had to kind of delist them myself. Things evolve, but I felt really crappy about that, because I mean, I told a lot of friends to get on LastPass, and and I trusted them for many, and they were trustworthy for a long time. So it's rough. But anyway, Nate, do you have any thoughts about, like, on your site, what you do for recommendations, what your personal criteria are? How do you decide what to recommend and not?
Yeah, real quick, I will say I also used to recommend LastPass for quite a while, and I was recently reminded of it in one of my blog posts. Annie Duke wrote a book called Thinking in Bets, and she talks about what she calls resulting, which is where you make a decision, like recommending LastPass, and then it goes horribly wrong, and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And it's like, no, but you actually made the right choice with the information you had available to you at the time. So just, if that helps anybody out there, try not to beat yourself up if you Yeah. But anyways, yeah. So like Jonah was saying, I also, over at the New Oil, I do try to have criteria, like objective criteria I can list. They're probably not the same to be, like you said, privacy guides. Well,
different audiences potentially criteria too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was going to say. It's, it's different audiences, and the New Oil is a much smaller project. So thankfully I haven't had any issues with people coming in like Skiff trying to just check a box and pump up their value for an acquisition. I think my issue, to be completely honest, is I am a little bit of a people pleaser. And so for a long time, I was kind of trying to like positively respond to any feedback I got that was in good faith. And now I've gotten a lot better at just staying focused. Like I used to have a long time ago, I had a little advanced section of the website where I would talk about like Tor and virtual machines and Tails. And then I just woke up one day and I realized I'm like, my mom's never going to use a virtual machine. She's never going to use Tails. And that's okay. She doesn't have to. Like, I'm going to let other people talk about that. There's plenty of videos out there. There's plenty of websites. And at one point I listed XMPP, I think, as a messenger. And then same thing. I'm just like, this is not for my target audience. And again, these are great tools. There's nothing wrong with them. I use some of these tools myself, but it's the target audience thing. And so for me, it was really about trying to stay focused on that. And because I'm a firm believer that any company or service that tries to do everything usually ends up doing everything poorly.
Right.
And so I would rather just, for the new oil, I'd rather just like stay focused on that mission of catering to the beginners and the newbies and getting them up to speed. And then they can move on to more advanced projects like privacy guides and get much more detailed, much more rigorous, which I know there is something to be said for that of like, oh, but what if they, like with the LastPass thing, what if they get all their family using like Session and then they look at privacy guides and they're like, oh, actually Signal's a better option. And I think that's a good argument. That's certainly fair, but I don't know. It's, yeah. Well, I think I'm just trying to stay focused on that target audience.
Yeah. It's challenging. So I thought the audience might be interested to hear from a few of us about this because we make recommendations all the time, but I know some people hang on these things like Carrie recommended. I'm definitely going to use that. And I'm like, okay, I gave it my best shot. Don't kill me if this thing goes bad. And we've been at this long enough that things go bad. I mean, things change. And oftentimes, like I said before, it tends to be they get bought out. So now they have a new master or they've got VC funding and those VCs are expecting a return on investment. And so the VCs get to have a lot more say in what they do and what they don't do. A lot of times those, that means they focus less on security and privacy and they focus more on features. And the worst, of course, is like private equity funds. If someone comes in just to like Dracula, just to suck these guys dry of whatever resources they have and leave them this husk. And so necessarily over the years, things are going to change. Can you think of any more high profile changes that you guys have made, the recommendations that you've had to strike over the years? Any stories there?
The bigger ones that come to mind for me were right when I was starting out with all of this, because we had previously recommended Wire, that messenger, and then they were acquired. And then shortly after, Start Page was acquired by System One. And both of those were pretty large changes to our recommendations that we ended up writing posts about. We even went back and forth with the CEO of Start Page for a while, figuring out like how this impacted their service, etc. And ultimately, like Wire was never relisted because it didn't make any sense to do so. Those were the big ones. And then I think for a long time we didn't have any super major upsets until Skiff Mail came along recently.
I had such high hopes for them.
Yeah, it was a bummer because they were seemingly doing a lot of things right. There were definitely a lot of things that I wish they had done better, but compared to even the other email services that we recommend, I didn't think they were significantly worse than the other ones. And so at the time, I wasn't as pessimistic as now I personally think I am about these VC funded services, because I was like, well, you never know what's going to happen. But I think that the pattern that we've seen with all of these is that typically it doesn't end up going well. The other one that comes to mind is I don't think we ever explicitly recommended this on Privacy Guides itself, but it was very popular in our community and on other privacy sites. It was the suite of simple mobile tools on Android, which was also acquired by some private equity. I think they're like an ad tech site. I don't remember exactly what their deal was, but they took over all of these very popular Android apps. And I know that was a big discussion on the Privacy Guides forum because their business model was basically taking established apps and adding subscription models to them, basically. And so people were looking for alternatives to those. So yeah, a lot of stuff in this space, definitely, like you said, it goes awry due to acquisitions for the most part, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, all right. So when you look at a new privacy product or service, what are the signals that immediately make you skeptical? What are some solid red flags? Are there any patterns you've learned to recognize that maybe other people would miss?
Well, that thing I just mentioned is one of them.
Yes.
VC funding,
yeah,
private equity.
How does an average user tell that, though?
No, it's tricky. I think besides that, the biggest red flags that we look for are marketing based. We try and see are they explaining things in a way that makes sense to technical people? Because there's so many technical words and buzzwords and jargon that these sites in services can use to sound very impressive and sound very legitimate to the average layperson. But if they don't make a ton of sense to us, then that's a big alarm right there. And we try and spread the word about that as much as possible. Gotcha.
Nate, any stories?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to add on to that, I think some of the things I've learned are kind of, this is more for privacy policies, but kind of in the opposite direction of what Jonah just said. I've seen a lot of privacy policies that literally say, we never share your data ever, period. That's our privacy policy. And in my head, I'm like, okay, but I expect you to share data if the cops come knocking with a valid warrant. Like, this seems misleadingly overly simple. Like, I appreciate that you're not drowning us in legalese, but this feels misleading. I think I also look for, like Jonah said, I don't really look for specific things. It's more like, how do they present themselves, and are they trying to be trustworthy? And so in that vein, another thing I look for is, are they overhyping themselves? Which I know that is part of marketing, is you want to convince people why your product is the best. But there's a very fine line between, or I guess very blurry line between, like, trying to hype your product up and sell people on it, and like outright misleading them and overselling what your product can do. So I try to look for companies that are somewhere like, okay, maybe they don't put it on the front page, but maybe when you click on the FAQ, they say like, oh, here's the limitations of our product. Here's what we can't do. Here's what we don't defend against. Because to me, that's a lot more honest. And so I try to look for things like that.
All right, well, I got a confession to make, and that is that I've almost completely given up on reading privacy policies, because I'll look at them like briefly, and if it's like some of the ones you're talking about where someone actually is like, this privacy policy is tight because they don't collect anything, and they really are just trying to tell you, okay, look, here's the weird situations like law enforcement where I'll have to give up whatever information I have, but I don't have much to give. You could kind of tell that by a quick glance at a privacy policy. But as soon as it's more than 4 pages long, I'm like, nah, that's pointless. It's like trying to decipher a genie wish that's going to go awry because it's not going to be done the way you thought it's going to be done, right? So it's like it's all this obfuscation and legalese. It's not meant to be understood, and there's so many. It's filled with so many loopholes. It's like I kind of just given up. I don't know. Do you guys ever feel that way when you're looking at privacy policies?
No, I totally understand what you mean, and I think I'm kind of in a similar boat. I've never been a huge privacy policy person, although I do think they have a lot of value for understanding how services work, and it is certainly something that we would look at when we're recommending these tools and stuff. But to me, like, if I'm personally using these tools or choosing something to switch to, I like to have a very thorough understanding of what the service does on a technical level, what it's capable of doing and what it's not capable of doing. And I go into a lot of services basically with the idea in mind, and this is just for me personally again, but I just assume that whatever data that they have that I know that they're not protecting with something like strong encryption, I just assume that they're sharing that data with whoever they want, right? And I just assume it's always going to be the worst case scenario, no matter what, for any of that data. And so I really try to focus on the question for me then becomes like, okay, I know the service can protect this data. Is that the only data that I want protected? And in a lot of cases, the answer is yes. So I could take like Proton Mail, for example. They encrypt all of these messages at rest, so all of my stored emails and all of that historical data is secure. And then I just accept the risk that like some of this metadata, like the IP address that I'm connecting from, or the emails that are coming in before they encrypt them, if they're coming from unencrypted services, I just know in the back of my mind that those are potential risks that Proton could be sharing. And so like when we have cases like Proton sharing the IP address of one of their users with law enforcement, which was a high profile thing that came up, It was, to me personally, not a huge deal because I had already kind of accounted for the possibility and the probability that would happen, right? In my mind, it was kind of expected of a service because exactly like Nate was saying, if they have this data and somebody comes with a valid warrant, like these services they don't really have a choice but to comply with those unless they want to shut down. So what are they supposed to do, right?
And I think crucially, if you had read through Proton's privacy policies, I don't think they did anything that violated anything they said they would do in this exact circumstance. So it shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody that they would do this. And to your point, if wherever you operate, you're in somebody's jurisdiction, unless you're on what is that Sea Land, that old oil derrick that's off the coast of the UK.
Yeah, that one.
Unless you're printing your own money or something, and so unless you're in international waters, you got to serve somebody, as Bob Dylan used to say. So anyway, I don't think that should have been a surprise to anybody. And yeah, I'm with you.
I can see both sides of that for sure, because exactly like we both just said, I don't think it should have been a huge surprise, but I also don't like it when companies, like in their marketing, you'll see a lot of times they will say, or they'll make claims that are overly simplified, because you kind of have to from a marketing perspective for it to make sense, but it'll be at odds with their privacy policy. And that is very unfortunate when that happens. It's why we try to focus, and I want to focus even more on educating people about, like, this is the stuff that Proton is actually able to protect and what they're not, because if you just take their marketing claims seriously, you might be misled, and I wouldn't want people to only look at that. I want people to understand, like, oh, actually, they only protect this data, and they do it very well, but you have to know what they're doing and what they're not doing. I think that's super important.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate when I talk to people, from various these companies that I interview, and they really have gone to great lengths to engineer themselves out of the problem. Like they don't want your data. They want to have as little as possible. And if they don't have it, they can't give it away. Or if they have it, it's an encrypted blob that they can't decrypt, which is the exact same thing. So yeah, I appreciate that for the companies that do it. And by the way, back to the privacy policy thing, I saw a couple companies, I can't remember by name, but they would actually have two privacy policies. They have like a human readable one, and then they'd have the official one. Like the official one is the official one. Like if they go to court, that's what that's what you should have been looking at. But they really make a good faith effort in trying to give one that is consumable by a human and in a much shorter form. You don't see that very often, but I appreciate it when they try to do that.
I do like that, especially when they're side by side, because sometimes if you look at the human readable one and like they make a claim that doesn't make sense, then you can very quickly like try and figure out what they're trying to say. I like those human readable ones, I would argue, but of course I'm not a lawyer, but I feel like I think for most people or for most companies, that should typically be sufficient. And I think that we do have a weird case where like these companies, a lot of the times they don't even hire lawyers themselves, but they just copy other privacy policies that they find online and adapt into their services, and they become overly complicated for reasons that are completely unnecessary. Because a lot, especially privacy protecting companies, like the amount that they're doing with your data is very little, so you don't actually need this whole legalese document. And I wish more companies would understand that and only have a human readable version, if that makes sense for them. And I don't think that happens now.
Well, my dream is that still someday that we're going to flip it on its head, and we're going to write the privacy policies like GPL, like these open licenses, and we're going to all say, I'll use your product as long as you agree to privacy policy version 2.1 that was released last year, that this common privacy policy. I think the wrong people are writing the policies. Cool. All right. So what is something, I can't wait to hear the answer to this question. What is something that you do or a product that you use that you explicitly do not recommend for most people?
Cubes. Cubes, okay. Hands down. For listeners who don't know, Cubes is technically not a Linux distro, but I'm going to call it Linux anyways. I describe it as like Linux for paranoid people or something like that. I think sometimes I call it Paranoid Linux, but I think that's actually a Linux distro, so that's how I do it. But it's extremely it's very intensive on your machine, so you need a pretty good machine to run it to begin with. And then like everything's a virtual machine and everything's very compartmentalized, and you have to have at least some experience with Linux to use it. But yeah, that I hate that question when people they're kind of like you were saying earlier about like helping people threat model, and sometimes people just get really exasperated and they're like, what do you do? I'll just do what you do. And I'm like, no, don't do what I do, because it's insane and you'll quit in a week.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, for me, I use it because it honestly, not even for the security, it just the compartmentalization works really well with my workflow, and it allows me to have like multiple Signal accounts very easily and stuff like that. So that's why I use it. But yeah, that's my answer. I get that all the time.
All right.
Yeah, I don't recommend it for most people.
I mean, personally, I love Cubes, and it really is the the only desktop Linux I would ever consider using, kind of for the reasons Nate just said. I like the compartmentalization. It's very challenging on Linux because I feel like a lot of the times when I use Linux, like different programs I install will interfere with each other, and so it's nice to have them separated. But I won't make this question too much about cubes in Linux. I would maybe go from the opposite direction. I think that we, as I guess you could say privacy educators or influencers or content creators or whatever you want to call all of us who work on this stuff, we're definitely putting ourselves more out there than the people who were trying to teach about this stuff. And we're certainly using a lot of tools that we wouldn't recommend people use. Obviously, we have a YouTube channel now, and we're in the whole Google ecosystem pretty heavily just to get that content out there. We even have like I have a Facebook account, for example, and we have a Facebook page for privacy guides where we reshare these videos. I don't know how successful that is. I should probably take a look at the stats because maybe it's not worth it. But a lot of the tools that I think I use and that we use in our work that we certainly wouldn't recommend people use, we're just using them in a very different way than I think the average person is. So like if I have a Facebook account, for example, but I'm not like posting on it every day or uploading pictures of it, of my social life or personal stuff or whatever. And so like, there's a lot of tools where just merely having an account with them, I think, is not the end of the world. And sometimes we'll get questions like this. People will be like, why are you using these services, or why are you sharing all of this information? And it's like, well, we're trying to reach new people here. It's not like because we personally use all of these services. It's very limited in scope. And I think that a lot of these services, like Google services, can be used if you use them in a very limited way, because they obviously, like YouTube, for example, I think is the most obvious. Like, this has a clear benefit to the internet and society at large. I think out of all of Google's projects, I personally think YouTube is like the most influential and the best resource in a lot of ways. But that doesn't mean just because I have a YouTube account, or just because I'm uploading to YouTube, or just because I'm watching YouTube videos, I don't need to like invest in the rest of the Google ecosystem and use Gmail and all of that other stuff, right? So that's what I would say. Yeah.
And the same thing for me too. And this is one of the things I've struggled with for a long time. I've replaced I've got a whole series of articles on de-Googling things, and I do it wherever I can, but there's still some things left that I could just, until like, for example, until Proton came out with Proton Docs and Proton Sheets in particular, I was still using those all the time. And I'm still in the transition process because those are still pretty relatively new. But the other one that I just recently, thankfully, was able to get away from is Google Forms. There was just every other forum site that I find is ridiculously expensive or uselessly restricted for the free accounts. It was almost unusable. And so I was like, literally at the top of my listener survey, I think one year I even said, I know I'm using Google. I'm sorry. I know, like, I had that in the thing. Like, I'm sorry I'm using Google, but it's the best free one there is. Thankfully, there are some other options now. I just did the thing on that. So that for me, it often does come down to, I want to use something more private. I would love to pay Google for the privilege of using their stuff as long as it would just be private. If I could pay them $100 a year, I'd do it in a heartbeat if it meant that they weren't processing my data, but they don't give you that option. No. All right. So let's wrap things up, guys. I can't let you go without talking about this. We've talked a lot about age verification laws and the repeal of Section 230. These have been hot topics lately, usually in relation to big social media companies. But they're also, honestly, a direct threat. And I don't think people get this. Like, it's a direct threat to things like Privacy Guides forums and my patron server. Like, if these laws get passed, I can't afford to monitor these things. I'm going to probably have to shut them down. So what are you going to do if you're legally required to vet your users' ages or to become liable for the content they post on your forums?
That's, of course, that's an excellent question. And it's not something super answerable right now because we don't know what form all of that stuff is going to take. Age verification, at least specifically in the case of the Privacy Guides forum, that's far more of a concern than something like the repeal of Section 230, even though I think in general for the internet, a repeal of Section 230 would be worse overall than even all of this age verification. And we can get into that. But I think that as far as being liable for content, the nice thing about having like such a niche forum is that we're not like getting a ton of different content that we'd have to look through. Pretty much every single post on our forum is going to be read by moderators, actually. So moderating that wouldn't be a huge deal for us, whereas collecting data for age verification, if we have to, that would be a huge problem. But it depends on what those laws look like and how we're affected, and I really just couldn't say what that would look like. For something like your Discord server, on the other hand, I think the Section 230 thing would be a larger problem, because like you wouldn't personally have to worry about liability in that case, but Discord certainly would as the platform host, and they might decide to just, hey, we're not going to let people create servers anymore, or we're only going to allow like the super big servers where we can moderate them better, and we'll get rid of all of the small servers like yours or all these other random ones because we just can't moderate them. So I think that that's a huge concern for a lot of different communities that are built on platforms like Discord or Reddit or other ones. We're going to see kind of like I've heard it referred to as like a Disneyfied version of the internet where everything is perfect and they don't allow any other content. It's only content from big companies because those are who they trust to put out content. So,
well,
like,
they're the only
YouTube
companies that probably could afford to do some of these moderation things, right? I mean,
well, not even like moderation, but like YouTube, for example, they might only allow videos from like TV networks, like Jimmy Fallon videos or whatever, because they know that content is going to be good. Whereas like uploads from a random person, that could be anything. We might be liable for that now. So they could start shutting that down, and I would be very concerned about that.
I think those are all really good concerns for sure and really good points. But another one that I think Taylor Lorenz brought this up when we interviewed her late last year is that it and I mean, maybe you didn't mention this because it just goes without saying, but it would also just result in a lot more censorship in general of like, if anything gets uploaded that's remote, I mean, not to be political, but, you know, here in the US, we have free speech, right? I can criticize any president and I'm allowed to do that. And we could see a world where any sort of criticism, any sort of like news recap, if it's just riding that line where they're just like, we don't want to risk it, so we're just going to take it down. Even though under current circumstances, it would be like, yeah, that's totally fine. It's free speech. But in this new world where you're liable for everything, again, regardless of who's president, it could just become like, let's err on the side of caution because we can only afford so many lawsuits before the money we put aside for lawsuits runs out. So yeah, I think that's also a concern.
That's such an important point because the potential repeal of Section 230 is crazy to me, because all Section 230 is, I think people need to understand this, is it just reaffirms what the First Amendment guarantees in the U.S. It doesn't add any new protections. In fact, your liability, in theory, should be exactly the same with or without Section 230 because of the First Amendment. We are protected by the Constitution to do all of these things. What Section 230 does is it allows you to very quickly and easily dismiss lawsuits against you instead of being, like Nate said, buried under all of these legal cases, because you have to like fight it out and defend your case and like prove that the First Amendment applies to you, which it does, but people don't have the money and the lawyers to prove it. Whereas Section 230 allows you to say, hey, here's precedent for all of this. Here's a law that says like this specifically is protected by the First Amendment. We don't need to rehash this in court for every single individual case. So it just doesn't make sense to repeal it because it's a protection that we are all guaranteed by the Constitution, at least in the U.S., right?
Well, and I'll just say this too, and this is something that whenever I interview somebody who's a lawyer always brings up, and that is you're defending the right to say certain things, and you want to, outlaw's not the right word, but you want to make it really hard for people to say other things you don't like. It's a real slippery slope, and it, you know, whatever that is today can change quickly with a new administration, or look at all the things how rapidly things have changed around the world, and it doesn't take long for things that, you know, you think are fine today, someone else thinks are not fine tomorrow, and they're in charge. So, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest thing, especially when it comes to age verification, that I'm concerned about. It's like there's all sorts of debates in the privacy and especially the cybersecurity community about like the security and privacy of different age verification solutions. But at the end of the day, how privately you can verify your age online doesn't matter as much as the fact that the government is mandating which sites have to implement age verification.
Right.
Because they say adult sites now, but that's such a nebulous term. And we've already seen people in the UK, for example, try to argue that Wikipedia should fall under that and in other educational resources. And so it's certainly a slippery slope argument, but how fast these countries who have implemented age verification, how fast they've already slipped down this slope it should be shocking to people. And I think that needs to be a huge red flag for everyone outside of these countries. Like, we cannot follow in the footsteps here because we are already so quickly seeing the detrimental effects that these laws are having on people's privacy and security, and also just in terms of government censorship.
And we are putting these frameworks in place. They don't exist now, but once these frameworks are in place, once it is technically possible to block these things, all bets are off.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. So that was heavy. Let's wrap this up on some fun stuff. Where do you guys go to for advice? What are some of your favorite resources and things that you trust when you're trying to evaluate a new product, or, I wonder what blah, blah, blah thinks about that?
Well, a bit of a cheating answer, but as I guess a more well-known figure in the space, I have access to other experts. Like, even before I joined Privacy Guides, I knew most of the team. You mentioned that you and I and all three of us hang out in some other chats together. And so, like, if I'm ever unsure, for me personally, I usually go to those people that I trust, that I know have more expertise than me, or maybe have heard of this company before or whatever. I think the more readily accessible version of that would be, we already mentioned the forum. And, we get on the forum, we get a fair number of projects that, for some reason, message us directly, use the mod mail function to message the team and be like, hey, you should, not even projects. Sometimes they're just people like, hey, I found this cool tool and you guys should recommend it. And every time somebody does, sometimes I do, I reply back and I'm like, cool, post about it in the forum. Let everybody else look at it. Let everybody else chat. And, people have opinions.
Yeah.
They'll be really quick to speak up and time. Yeah. And I mean that in a good way, for the record, not just like people have opinions on this stuff and they are more than happy to share if you ask in the forum. And so I think the Privacy Guides forum is a really good resource for that, to be totally honest.
There's a lot of power in crowdsourcing.
Absolutely. I think maybe similarly to Nate, I don't have the most actionable advice for regular people. Certainly following other people in our Signal group chat, for example, I trust very highly their opinions and getting information about new stuff from all of those people. But as far as specific people that I would follow or trust, not a lot comes to mind, because I think this is, again, really, really only useful for me, but I like to find out a lot of this information from feeds like Nate's social media feed for the new oil, for example. I think that's a super useful resource for finding news in this space. Otherwise, people posting on the Privacy Guides forum or messaging me with all of these news articles. Following certain people on Twitter, Matthew Green or Meredith Whitaker, big names like that. I do all of that to make sure that I'm aware of things happening. But then when it comes to analyzing what's going on and all of that stuff, I go from there and try and find the original sources for whatever they're talking about and try and analyze it on my own from there. And a lot of the times, again, I can't talk about how much I like the Privacy Guides forum enough. I feel like we keep bringing it up, but I really think it's a super useful resource, I think, for other people, but also for just myself.
Yeah.
I really try to get people's opinions there, and I also try to share as much as I can about things that I've found, both to help people who aren't able to do the analysis that I can do on these tools, and also to start discussions with our community members about all the stuff going on. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think just being as thorough as possible with sharing stuff there, and just having a variety of sources to follow, but not necessarily trust. Trust is just that's a tricky word for me. I try to eliminate trust as much as possible in all sorts of areas, with verifiable things instead, if I can.
One thing I want to add real quick on this topic, because since we're talking about trusting different people and their input, I wrote a blog about it on the new oil recently, but also you can just find it, YouTube videos, articles.
Oh, was that
anywhere.
the critical thinking one?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a good article.
For listeners who haven't read it, when I was in college, I took a philosophy 101 class, and it was literally just for the credits. And I was like, yeah, I like philosophy. Why not? And literally probably at least half of the class was about how to evaluate a claim. And so it's literally like, who's the person making the claim? Are they like Matthew Green, a well-renowned cybersecurity expert who knows what he's talking about? What's the evidence they're presenting? Stuff like that. So I think learning those tools, and I hate to say learning critical thinking because it sounds like I'm being sarcastic, but yeah, just learning what the steps are for a critical thinking process and how to evaluate a claim, I think are really helpful because, like I said, everybody has an opinion and sometimes they're not great opinions. And so when somebody just comes in and like, oh, this tool sucks. Okay, great. Why? What's your evidence for that? Why do you say that? What's your expertise? And in a good faith way, like understanding where this person is coming from and why they don't recommend this tool or why they do recommend it. I think that really helps cut through a significant chunk of the noise, especially when you can't just go to like Matthew Green or somebody and be like, hey, what do you think of this? So.
Well, that was a great article. Actually, I'll definitely put it in the show notes. I don't know why I didn't. I was like this close to like literally posting that to my socials the other day. So I'll do that too, because it was a great article and I totally agree. And I think you mentioned this in the article and I've said this for years is we absolutely have to have a mandatory high school class in critical thinking. And I think media literacy, and they could probably be in the same class, especially today.
Probably, yeah.
Media literacy, that was a big thing that I wanted to mention because it has changed so much lately. Yeah. I feel like I might hazard a guess and say I'm probably the youngest one on this call. But
we have video, you don't, but I think you're probably right.
I think like even for me growing up or like starting my life before the age of smartphones, like growing up with desktop computers and computer labs versus like iPads and Chromebooks, I think that really has, I can just tell that has really affected the way that we consume media in general, because it's such a shift going from like, oh, this information is on the computer in front of me because I searched for it and I was looking it up and I wanted to read about it, versus now all of this stuff is like it's being shown to you and you're consuming it, right? Like all of these algorithms especially are deciding what people see. And I think losing out on that kind of intentional using a computer as a tool to learn about things and now switching to more content consumption and entertainment, I think that has probably been a big part, at least in my opinion, a big contributor to this decline in media literacy that we're seeing. And I totally agree that like this is something that needs to be taught certainly from an early age. I would even say well before high school personally, especially before I started working on all of this stuff full time. I was working at a middle school as an educator, not as it's a whole separate, it was a tech role. I won't get into it, but I worked with a ton of like middle school kids, and this is stuff that I totally think that they could get or grasp. And I think even a lot of kids, earlier, like in elementary school, when I was in elementary school, this was a while ago, but they still had computers and we had like typing classes and we had like classes on how to use search engines, because at the time you had to like use it in a very certain specific way. They couldn't just figure it out. You have to know what keywords are, right? Yep. And I'm talking about this stuff in like the fourth grade or whatever. Like this is stuff where you can introduce these concepts really early on, and I think kids would get it. But I think that the school systems, and this is more from my perspective from someone who worked for a major school district here, I think that the school systems are really letting down kids right now, especially when it comes to technology. Yeah. There's just so much that is not being taught, and I think that there is a completely incorrect and wrong mentality that like the kids know more than us about technology and that they're smarter and they can figure it out. I think that is completely not true, but that assumption is very dangerous, and I think that guides a lot of the decisions to not have classes like this, which is really unfortunate.
Well, and I also wish they teach basic security and privacy as well. That might be a further reach, but I remember when I was talking to Christopher Lees about this, and I asked her a question. I was dead serious. Like I'm afraid that we're raising a generation of kids that don't even understand what privacy means anymore. At least not like we understand it to mean. It's become so, I don't know, defeatist. And just, I don't even know if it's that far. It's like, it's just what they're used to now. Like, that's just the way things are. And that's what really bothers me, is that they don't know any different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that we interact with computers is just completely different from the way that it used to be. And I guess that just maybe young people will listen to this and just think that I'm old and out of touch. I don't know.
I was just thinking we sound like that old man yelling at the clouds.
Truly, but
it's true, though.
Jonah, has somebody come up to you and called you sir yet? That's when you know. That's when it really sinks in. Okay, all right. Let's wrap this up. Here's a softball to wrap it up. What's going on with you guys? What's going on in the next 12 months? What's going on your radar? What's on your roadmaps? Nate, let's start with you.
Oh gosh. Well, I will let Jonah speak for Privacy Guides. I know we do have some really big stuff coming up, but I will let him decide how much to say. Over at the New Oil, really my focus is just getting back into it. Before working at Privacy Guides, I worked a normal, quote unquote, normal day job. And I say quote unquote because overtime was expected of you. And basically, I mean, y'all saw it. I was so busy between surveillance report and my day job, and it was all I could do just to keep the news feed going consistently. And so videos completely went away. Blog posts were intermittent at best. But thankfully now with this job at Privacy Guides, I'm not having to commute anymore, and I'm working much more reasonable hours. So I've actually been able to get back into, I've been consistently blogging. I just put out my first video like a week ago or something. So yeah, over at the New Oil, it's just going to be more consistent content again.
Well, that must feel nice.
It does.
All right, Jonah, what's going on with Privacy Guides and you?
So over on the Privacy Guides side of things, we just launched a new section of our site dedicated towards people who want to become better privacy advocates themselves. We have an activism section now, and that'll cover it. One of our staff writer, M, has been working really hard on this for the last few months, and it has a lot of useful tips on how to share this information with other people, and also how to organize kind of a movement around privacy. And so if people are interested in that side of things, if you're already somewhere far on your privacy journey and you want to help other people out with that, that is something super cool that I think people should check out if you're interested.
She does some great work.
Yeah, all of Em's work is super amazing, and we're really happy to be working with her on all this stuff at Privacy Guides. As far as other things that we're working on, I think a big focus for us is going to be more on the video side of things. So really all the stuff that Nate's been working on, as well as Jordan, our other video content producer. We want to get a lot more videos out, especially about beginner topics, getting people into it, but also more advanced guides or more walkthrough tutorials. Like just recently, we released some course material on how to secure your smartphone. So we have 2 courses on our channel right now that you may or may not have seen. When we're recording this right now, the final part of those courses is coming out to the public in a few days. So it should be out by the time people are listening. And if people like that content, that might be a direction that we continue to go in. But yeah, we're still figuring out the video stuff. I do think that video is going to be a huge thing for us just because it's a new medium and it'll reach new people. As far as everything else, we're just going to be continuing doing what we always do on the forum in our community with the people who want to get advice or talk about this stuff or learn more. I think focusing on the forum community will be a big part of next year for sure.
Well, I want the audience to know that I rely on you guys a lot. Nate, your social media posts, I can't tell you how many times I found something like, oh, that's really cool. And you popped up something on social media that I checked out. And the New Oil site is great as well. And Privacy Guides, wonderful, just fantastic. My first go-to when I'm like, I wonder if they've reviewed this product, I always go to Privacy Guides forums. And Privacy Guides, the resources, then I'd love to check in every once in a while on the forums. I lurk more than anything, but there's always great discussions there. And I like hearing other people's point of view. So you guys are doing fantastic stuff. I'm glad to have you back on the show. We'll have to do this more often than we have been. So thanks for coming on the show. It's been great.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's been really fun to talk with you about all this stuff.
So be sure to check out Privacy Guides and the New Oil if you've not looked at them. They are both amazing sites with a ton of top-notch content geared toward really a very broad audience. They both have stellar recommendations for privacy respecting and more secure products and services, and they also explain why they're better than the mainstream big tech offerings. There's a lot to be learned on both of their sites. I would encourage you to poke around in the Privacy Guides forums. that's a place where anybody can join, and I encourage you to join, and can ask questions and respond to questions and just chat about all things privacy and security and things related to those. There's some pretty broad topic areas there. And if you have questions, there's a good chance somebody else has that question too. You might just search for it. Otherwise, ask it. It's a really great community with lots of interesting opinions and discussions. A lot of pertinent news items, for instance, pop up there. It's a great place to just stay up to date on what's going on. And again, if you've got questions, it's a great place to go to for answers. Now, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, I think, but Privacy Guides also has an extremely comprehensive and thoughtful guide that they call the Privacy Activist Toolbox. But again, it's not really specifically about protesting. It covers that a little bit, but it's also about just getting informed and being effective at spreading privacy, knowing your rights, and then learning how to advocate for those rights. It's a fantastic resource and very, very well put together. I was quite impressed. So when you do go, be sure you check that out in particular. And also, by the way, Privacy Guides has a podcast you could check out. They do video, which I have steadfastly avoided doing for my own reasons. But anyway, they do have a podcast that's video and audio. You should check it out. I think they do all of theirs live and then just record them and post them. So anyway, that's another one you should definitely check out. Links to all of this stuff is in the show notes. And then I must say, if you're already enjoying some of their content in whatever the form that may be, I will say that they do rely on community support, and they're providing a lot of value. So there is a big heart-shaped symbol in the upper right corner for donations. You might want to give that a click. Okay, so patrons, on Thursday, you will get bonus Q&A as usual. I asked the guys if you could go back and start over, would you do anything differently? Yeah, I asked them how they deal with like privacy purists, people that like it's my way or the highway kind of people, and trolls inevitably because you're online. I asked them if there's one product that they could wish into existence, what would that be? You know, just kind of fun questions between privacy advocates. And we cover some interesting topics there. You get a little more behind the scenes feel for what it's like to do what we do. So patrons, you will get that bonus content as usual on Thursday. All right, so as I said, I'm going to be out of town most of this coming week. So the news show that's going to come out next Monday might miss some news stories, but I will catch up on those stories in the next news cycle. All right, we've had plenty of time already today, so let's call it here. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.